Welcome to Crossbeats production. You're here with Nate28. This tutorial is more or less about compression and EQ and using compression and EQ on your drums, and also how to make your tracks sound more lively and not dull. Basically, this question came across to me from one of my subscribers. At least I hope he's a subscriber. But anyway, if he's not, anyway. So he asked me about a question to do with how I mix my drums, and also how I create a mix that doesn't sound like it's had the life sucked out of it. There's several techniques that you can use to do this kind of thing, but obviously the main key thing that you would want to do, especially with drums, is find good drum samples at the start and work with those, and then try and make them sound a little bit better if you can. But the main thing is obviously start with good drum samples, and don't try and make a bad drum sample sound good, because it'll save you a heck of a lot of work if you just get some good drum samples at the start and work with those. So that's the first key thing that you have to do when you're looking for a beat and you're creating a beat and working on everything that you've got to do with the beat. The drums that I've used, again, out of Maschine as per usual. I use a mixture of everything. I have resources everywhere, so I kind of mix and match and play around with stuff. But for the most part, I use Komplete. That's for my pianos, Rhodes keys, things like that. Maybe sometimes I use Velvet, which is probably my main kind of Rhodes keys that I use. All of these kind of instruments, they're just VST plugins that you can buy, and third-party VST stuff as well. Studio One has good stuff. You can use that as well. I just like to use third-party stuff because I'm so used to using, especially Komplete. I use a lot of Komplete stuff with all of my beats. But anyway, nonetheless, let's get into what I do to create this particular style of beat, and how I guess I work around my drums and making the beat sound up front and clear, and you can hear all the instruments and stuff like that. So first off, I'll play you the beat, and I'll play you a section of it, and then I'll let you hear that, and then I'll explain to you the kind of concepts and the workarounds and things like that that I do and employ into making this work for me. So let's play this beat. Let's go. Alright, so the beat's obviously not fully complete. I'm just showing you the basis of what I do. Just listening to it then, there's some things I could point out to you so you can understand how to get your beats sounding more clear and upfront. The thing is, with your kick and your bass and any instrument that's taking up low end. So for example, my piano, in the chorus of this track, I've got a lot of bass going on. This is a bass instrument here. So if I just play this to you, solo that out, you can hear quite a lot of low end in that as well. And the other thing that's got low end is the Velvet Keys, which is a Rhodes piano. Let me just quickly play that part that's got the actual Rhodes keys. There we go. Alright, so that's got a lot of low end as well, but in the chorus on its own, just this piano section as well has heaps of low end. So what you'd probably want to try and figure out is where you want to keep your low end and where you don't want to keep it on the instruments, and kind of work around that. Especially when you have drums, it's not so bad if you've just got two instruments that have got low end, but when you got things that are dynamic, like a kick and a snare and things like that, that will start to steal a lot of the low end from other things. So it starts to sound muddy and things are kind of get washed out in the mix. So especially with that kind of thing, like with the piano, like what you'd want to do, I mean, I've got a lot of processing on this piano, so it's hard for me to explain all of it, but the first thing I put on there was a compressor, and that's hardly doing anything. It's just really just touching the peaks of it. I'll play it to you and I'll show you. Just watch this, the needle's hardly moving. So that's really just grabbing the peaks of probably the low end part of that track. I've got an EQ second to that. You could do this either way. It doesn't really matter. I mean, it does affect the way that compressor will work if you put an EQ after the compressor. More or less, when I'm EQing, I would generally EQ prior to compression if I'm reducing, like say reducing the low end stuff. So if I was going to put a filter on here, I'd probably do that prior to compression so it didn't affect my compressor in a certain way. But it comes down to taste at the end of the day. Like really, some of the stuff that you do with compression and EQ, it really just comes down to the taste of the track and how you want it to sound. So there's no right or wrong move between EQ first and compression second, or compression first and EQ second. There's no rule of thumb there. It's just whatever taste you're looking for in that regard. So the other thing I've got is an oxide tape machine here. It's pumping a bit of low end kind of feed to that piano. If you play it without it. So it gives it a bit of fatness to the piano. Sometimes that could be good, sometimes that could be bad. You might end up having to get rid of it. It just depends on your track, to be honest. But then I've got some EQ happening here, a bit of a low shelf, and some of the reductive EQ in some parts of the piano, and then a bit of a high shelf at the top there to give it some more brightness. So that's kind of where you look at when you're looking at brightness of your track, because you've got to decide within the track, what do you want to be bright and what do you want to be dull, and what do you want to sort of stand in the middle of those two things there. I tend to find that with drums, for example, when you're looking at something that's a bright instrument, usually a snare is quite bright because of the transients and things like that and how short the transient is. It usually comes across quite bright. So if you're looking at the piano and the drums together, I'll just play those two together and I'll explain what I did to kind of work around that. Okay, so I haven't fully mixed this, and this is what I want to explain to you right now, and this is why I didn't do it in the first place. So what I'll quickly show you is this plugin here, Neutron. I'll put it on my drums, and I'll label this drums. And then what I'll do is put one on my piano as well. And I just want to show you something that's really going to help you understand what's going on here in that regard. So let's just label that piano. So what you do here is you put the masking meter on, and you can put drums as your detector, and it will show the drums and the piano playing together, and it will then show me what is being masked in the mix, so I can show you exactly what's happening. So let me move this to the left here. I'll just put a pin in that and bring this one up here, and we'll just pin that to the screen as well so we can see exactly what's going on here. So let's just play this section of the track, the chorus section, and you can just see there's a bit of noise going on. That's from the tape machine, so just disregard that. Okay, so if you pay attention to this section here, you can watch. I'll just actually increase the sensitivity of this so you can see what goes here. So watch this line up here. This will show you where it's masking, and also down here on that meter there. Alright, so what you got to decide in this sense is figure out what you want to win in this fight, because you can't have both the instruments taking up both of the spectrum completely at the entire time of the track there. So say for example I got an inverse link EQ here, and I got this EQ and I boost it. I'll just get rid of these ones here so it doesn't get in the way. Alright, cool. So let's just get an inverse link and we'll see what we can do here. Alright, so as you can hear, the piano started to move out of the way and the kick came in and it was more clear, and it wasn't interfering with the piano so much. So in that regard, that's one way of EQing your piano or whatever instrument it is that's taking up the low end from your drums and trying to work around the two. So, I mean, if you're looking at, say, for example, your drums and a bass, or your drums and a piano, or drums, or whatever it might be, some things that are just going to interfere with each other that you have to kind of work around. So it's really a give and take kind of thing where you just have to work around what frequencies you want to keep on certain instruments and what you want to remove. I wouldn't go in there and just get a low high pass filter and just, you know, get rid of everything, because it's going to start to make your piano, if that's a piano, it's going to make it sound weak and gutless. Or if it's your drums, you're going to have no drums. So you can't even hear the kick anymore. So I mean, you got to kind of figure out what's going to sound right to you and your ear and for your track. I can only show you examples on this track, but you know, in that regard, that's kind of how you work around it. So that's one way to get your drums sounding more crisp and sounding clear in the mix, and work you around that. The other thing is with the drums themselves. What I did when I first created these drums, I created them in Maschine like I explained earlier. I bounced them out and they're in audio files, as you can see here. So this is the drums, how I've got them in the blue. And what I did then was I got an EQ and I first put that, actually it's Neutron actually, so I'll show you exactly what I did. So I used Neutron to EQ some of the kick, and I brought some brightness into the kick. I reduced some of the annoying frequencies in the low end and the mid range, top end mid, and I gave it a bit of a boost at the low end frequencies. Also, I've got some exciter going on and some compression, very minimal compression. As you can see, it's just barely hitting the needle there. It's getting about maybe 2 minus 2 dB compression, and it's a reasonably fast attack. I actually used the track assistant to get some of these settings, and then I messed around with them a bit and ended up with what I've got. The main thing though is the dynamics of the kick. So when I first put the kick in, it was somewhere around about, I think, minus 6 dB or something, but then, you know, you increase your EQ, you're increasing some decibels there, so you're getting some high-end frequencies. That increases the volume of the kick. Also, the exciter, when I put that on there, it also increased some of the volume as well. So what I had to do was get a limiter, and I put the limiter on. Sorry, I'm just having to get comfortable here. I put the limiter on the track, on the kick, and I reduced the volume down to minus 6.5. So it always stayed at that level of minus 6.5. It didn't exceed that. So that's a technique that you can use to employ on your kicks to keep the transients intact. Don't reduce it too much with a limiter, because you'll start to lose transients. But basically what a limiter is, it's in essence a compressor, but has a threshold ceiling and it can't get past that, and it works in a similar kind of fashion to a compressor. But you know, sometimes you just have to limit your kick or your snare or what other instruments that are very dynamic intensive, or transient intensive, I should say, to try and control certain things in the aspect of the mix. So that's what I did with my kick. So that's the kick on its own. So already there, the dynamics have been somewhat controlled of that kick. And similar kind of thing that I did with the snare as well. I reduced some EQ out of the low end frequencies, gave it a bit of a low end mid kind of boost, and some of the high end stuff I reduced some of that and gave it a high shelf as well. Same thing here with the limiter though. I've set a limiter here to 11.9. Actually, I'll just move that down again to minus 12. So that's making sure that the transient doesn't exceed that level there. So if it hits the limiter, it won't go past that minus 12 dB threshold that I've set there. So that's one fashion you can use. And then I've just got this analog delay on here because at the end of the track, as you can see here, where it fades out, there's a bit of a delay thing going on. So I'll just play that to you quickly. Yeah. So that was just the analog delay that I had, and I just left that on there. I actually don't really even need that anymore. So I might just minimize that. Cool, so we'll just take that off. The next thing was a chorus. So the chorus allowed the snare to be spread in the stereo spectrum there. So, I mean, if you're looking at kicks, snares, things like that, it depends on where you want them to sit in the mix. Sometimes you want them dead center in the middle. Other times you want them to be a bit spread. I employed the same theory with the kick. I spread that out a bit and gave it a bit of stereo width. But then when it came down to the actual mix, what I did was, let's quickly show you something here. I set this so it allows the stereo spread on the top end, but then the low end frequencies here in the bottom. So you just quickly watch the kick. I'll just isolate that. If I can just get this. There we go. So I first employed this, and then I reduced it down to be mono at 87 hertz. But then I realized, you know what, forget that. I'll just send the whole entire thing straight into mono, and I put that into mono after I put the kick into mono after I put the chorus on there. So it's allowed the chorus then to be that sound of chorus that chorus creates, but I've switched it to mono so it doesn't affect my phase anymore. That's one thing. So I guess the things you want to look out for with your kick, snare, etc., is to make sure the dynamics are pretty even within the bus. And then when I'm talking about buses, this is the next thing I was going to get to. So I put all of these tracks, so all of the tracks in blue, into a bus. So what I did, I just highlighted them all, added to a bus, and this is the bus here, which I just shall put in blue as well. And actually no, I'll put that in white. So this is the bus, and what I've put on the bus here is EQ first. Again, like I said before, it's a taste thing. You don't have to employ these ideas, but it's just taste. So reduce some of the low end out of the real low end stuff, so 21 hertz. Now that's the stuff that is unnecessary to be there. I mean, you can use it on certain instruments, but I just took it out of the kick because I didn't need it. So next thing, I reduced some of the mid-range stuff, so 550 hertz. And next thing here was a reduction again at 1400 kilohertz, and then I put a low pass at 48 dB octave and 18,000 or 18k. So that's the first thing with the EQ. Next thing with the compression, really minimal compression. I'll just play the drums to you. So as you can see, the compressor's not compressing anything, but funnily enough, when you set a threshold on the compressor, it gives some kind of fat sound to the kick, even if you don't compress it. You just hold it just above the threshold or the peak level, and it gives you some kind of sound to that. I don't know, it's just bizarre, but it seems to do a good job of that. So let me just show you one thing though, because compression, you can kind of use this how you want tastily, but basically, I'll just play the drums here and I'll mess around with the compressor and I'll show you certain things that you can do so you understand how a compressor works. All right, so there we got the smallest amount of compression, so minus 0.16 dB. That's the compression I was getting. But as you can notice here, I've got a mix ratio of 49%. So I'll explain to you the compressor. I'll explain to you exactly what I did with this. I'll just zoom in here and explain it all. So basically, what I did was I set the compression attack settings to 45.3 milliseconds and the release setting to 181. Now, how did I come up with those settings? I'll explain to you exactly how I did it. So what I did was I go to this thing here. You can go onto any site, just type in reverb delay calculator or calculator for reverb delay, and it'll give you a thing to set in the BPM of your track. And you put the BPM of your track in and then hit enter, and it'll give you all of these notes here for triplets, dotted, and just normal notes for the tempo of your track. So say 1/16 or 1/8 or 1/4. That'll give me the milliseconds of delay on that reverb, or it could be for a compressor as well. So I use this quite frequently, especially when I'm mastering, to get the right compression settings and release times and things like that. It's quite handy to understand how that works, because if you look at your transients and how it affects your transients, and especially with the release of things on your compressor, it does help you a lot to fix that up. So what I did was I set the attack at a reasonably slowish, fast kind of attack for drums, but not too fast where it was killing the transient. I set the release for almost double time or triple time on that, and obviously the threshold is what first bring down to start compressing, and the ratio at 2.0. So not a lot of compression, and I don't have any makeup gain because I didn't want any. I just wanted to reduce the threshold down so it was starting to affect the transients a bit. And then I put a mix ratio of 49%, and that gave me that sound. So it sounds quite good. It's not stealing away from the track, it's actually giving back to the track. So that's the next thing with compression. So parallel compression, all that is, if you don't understand parallel compression, I might do another tutorial if you want me to, but I'm sure I've got some on my channel. But anyway, I'll look back and check if I do. So parallel compression is the original signal and the compressed signal. So just imagine 50% here or 50% here, or 49% here, and then 50% of the mix. Just think of it as it could be either 100% or it could be a percentage of the two, and you're mixing, you're reducing one or you're increasing the other, and that's basically how the parallel compression works. It's called New York compression or parallel compression, either way, but great, this feature that's actually in the plugin, so you don't have to set up buses and things like that. So you can just do this to taste. Obviously adaptive is just the release times, the attack times, things like that. It's detecting the speed of the transients, basically. Auto release is an auto setting for the attack and release settings, so that just allows it to do auto if I wanted to, but I actually want to set it. So that's the compression there on its own. You've got a knee here, which is just how this knee here is affected. So that's what the knee means. It means how steep the knee is, or how curvy it is, basically. So that's the compression settings there. Again, there with Neutron, I've just put that on there so I could show you the kick and the piano, so you could see that, and that's how that's working. So the next thing is, you know, everything is kind of set up in the process of mixing your track as you make it, but just be aware of the low end of each instrument, and be aware of the kick and the snare and things like that, and how they're going to sit in your track. But don't go and boost all these high-end frequencies. It's not necessary. If you have to boost all high-end stuff on the end, it's better off to do that in a mastering session and try and boost things in mastering, because if you boost it before you get to mastering, you're going to have a real heck of a time trying to get rid of the high-end stuff, and it's really annoying to try and master a track that's got so much high-end frequencies, because people like the track to sound bright and stuff like that when they're mixing it. You're honestly better off to not mix dull, but don't be so concerned with mixing a bright mix at the start. If you're mastering your own track, even so, keep that same fashion. Mix so it sounds nice and clean. Not too bright, not too dull, obviously, but just in the middle where you don't have to fight off the high-end frequencies later on when it comes to mastering. Because, you know, the mix is something that you want to get almost 90% there, and the mastering is just that little finished, nice, smooth technique on it to get the rest out of it. So I haven't done any mastering on this track. All I've done is add a, well, it's a little bit of mastering, a multi-band compressor, which I just left basically the settings there. EQ is flat, I haven't touched that at all. So what I would recommend, if you want to get a brighter mix at the end, get your EQ and put some a wide bell on there, and then start boosting some of the stuff at the top end once you've done all your compression and things like that. Don't boost until you get to the last phase, and then you're ready to put the limiter on. Before that limiter, you can start boosting and giving some nice frequencies at the top of the mix. But what I would stay away from, especially in the mix process, is making things bright or too overly bright, so that it's almost impossible to remove it when you get into the mastering phase. Because pretty much mixing is getting the instruments all to sit together and get them nice and cohesive, and mastering is to get all of those instruments and try and work around those and make it sound just that little bit more presentable for the world. It's not about changing the track. That's something you do in a mix. You don't do that in the mastering session. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope it's helpful to understand stuff. I know I rambled on a lot, but I'll try and do another video to break this down a bit more if that's possible. And also remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and give me the love like you keep doing all the time. I really appreciate you guys on this channel, and I got to say thanks and peace.